I'd let myself be happier. That's one of the 5 regrets of the dying, and one that not only applies to the end of life, but applies to you and to me today. Because we spend so much of our lives giving so much of a shit about everything around us that we forget to let ourselves be happy. But maybe we're just destined to die that way, right? Maybe we're meant to spend our whole lives taking it so seriously until death finally takes us. But that idea absolutely terrifies me. So I've spent many hours recently trying to figure out the solution to this problem, and this video is about exactly what I learned. It is Sunday, 15th of September. This is like one of my last sort of very free Sundays in the rest of the year. And we're going to Bromley because there's a place that does this special mushroom coffee. Not like magic mushroom, but like lion's mane. It's supposed to like increase focus and awareness. And the last time I had it, I really enjoyed it. So I'm gonna go there and do a bit of work. Before I set off, I'm gonna be real with you, right? And I'm going to be real with you in the context of this video, in the context of taking life way too seriously, because I think it is actually one of my biggest character flaws. And I think it's because, and I wonder if you relate to this, I feel like I have 2 primary voices in my head. One is like a drill sergeant, right? He's hardworking, disciplined, and ruthless, right? He always wants me to be studying or learning or creating content or training or being better and never switching off, right? And the drill sergeant, as you can probably imagine, is the guy that takes life way too seriously. Sometimes his voice is so loud that it affects my mental health and my performance in the world. And let me give you like an example in this, right? Last week I had my first training session with my new basketball team in London, right? And even though it was a regularly normal session, I performed, I would say, averagely, I wasn't happy, right? I left feeling quite disappointed with myself. I didn't really sleep well that night, and the next morning I woke up in a stinking mood. And that's because, even though it was a normal session, I didn't feel good because I hadn't met the hugely high and unrealistic expectations of the drill sergeant in my mind. And it seems like there's this backward law of the universe, right? Where if you focus really hard on trying to do something well, you then become so stuck in your head. You're fixated, you're overthinking, and then you just let go of your ability to just flow and live life and play the basketball game in the normal way that you would. You make mistakes on the simple stuff and you sort of overplay everything. But anyway, let's go to Bromley and we'll investigate this further. That was a hugely satisfying morning. Back to what I was saying. So the other voice in my head, the other mode of being, is like he's like a spiritual philosopher, right? He's got a long beard, he lives in a teepee, and he wants me to focus on my presence, right? My awareness in the present moment and just being happy and content with what is, right? And this bloke, he doesn't take life seriously whatsoever. So I think the first place I'm going to go is to learn about him more, and that's why I bought this book. That book was The Way of Zen by Alan Watts, and from reading it over the past week, the main fundamental lesson I've got is stop listening to the drill sergeant and listen more to the philosopher, because the drill sergeant voice in your head is just a product of your human ego, the part of you that wants to take life so seriously. In the book, Alan Watts basically breaks down the Buddhist idea that human beings wrongly assume that they need to take life so seriously in order to have control over their reality. But from that Buddhist perspective, that isn't really possible, because we don't have control over the external, and that's because there actually is no division between the self and reality. There is no us and the world. They are just one thing, because we are a part of the world, just as much as the tree outside my window or the spider in the corner of the bathroom. And the book argues that our ego gets so caught up and so fixated on trying to mold reality in our lives into the way we want them to be, when we forget that we are reality, right? We are a part of what is going on. We are reality consciously experiencing itself. And this causes a lot of frustration and suffering. In fact, Alan Watts puts it so nicely in the book when he says, his grasp upon the world is his stranglehold about his own neck, the hold which is depriving him of the very life he so longs to attain. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking like, Joel, surely the answer then is just to listen to the philosopher and ignore the drill sergeant completely. But unfortunately, right, like many problems in life, it's not as simple as black and white, right? It's a shade of grey. Because the drill sergeant fails to see, yes, that, you know, on a large scale, we're 1 in 8 billion and that we're on a floating rock burning from the inside in space, and that we shouldn't really take life seriously when we take that fact into account. But the problem with just relying on the philosopher is that that voice fails to see that our human life feels like it's significant, right? We feel like we are an individual living out their own story in the world. So we can't neglect that subjective experience. That's valuable in itself. So I think it's a balance point, right? Ending the pain of taking life too seriously is about figuring out, how do we care enough that we put effort into our lives without caring too much that we get in our own way and stop enjoying it? And that, people, is when an idea absolutely slapped me in the face. I realised that the two intentions of the drill sergeant and the philosopher, the two ways of being in my mind, were actually just two ends of the same spectrum. And we can call this spectrum the giving a shit about life spectrum, where the drill sergeant gives way too much of a shit and the philosopher gives 0 shits. And then the question becomes, how many shits do you want to give? Now, your answer might be different from mine, but from my investigations over the last week, I think I have found a Goldilocks point where you give just the right amount of shits. And it's something that me and Jacob talked about on the podcast recently that we called the state of play.
I think about it, we talked about it before, as in there's two main characters in my head. There's a drill sergeant and there's like an Alan Watts spiritual bloke with a long beard, right? And they both whisper in my ear all the time on what I should do. And in your analogy, you can put the drill sergeant on the professionalism side of the spectrum and the Alan Watts spiritual guide guy on the child part of the spectrum, right? And in the middle, that's the best spot you can live your whole life in. I mean, think about it this way. It's like taking life incredibly seriously, so you try really hard, but also knowing that you're going to die and nothing matters. Like, take everything like it's so deep, but it's actually not that deep. You know what I mean? Like, really put your efforts into things, but don't care if it works out. It's like, this is where the work is the reward. This is where you do the thing to the best of your ability, and you don't care how it does. You try really hard, but then relax about the result. And that is such a nice little place to be in the same thing in conversation.
And I don't really think I could put it in a better way than that. You see reality as completely uncontrollable, apart from one exception, which is you, the conscious individual with agency over their actions and their reactions. You conduct yourself with care and attention, but also with an understanding that on a large scale, any results out there in the world don't really matter. It's just like in a play, right, where actors intend to tell a meaningful story. They put effort into their performance, performing to the best of their ability, and the audience watching around are so invested in the story going on. But behind it all, everyone in that theatre knows that what's going on isn't really real. And we can think about life in a similar way. Shakespeare said that all the world's a stage, and I think he was right. Because I think you can play your role in the outside world to the best of your ability, right? Create a meaningful story where you do positive things in the world, but at the same time, have a background understanding that none of this is truly real or matters on a fundamental level. All we have is the present moment and the eternal now, and we're all just hurtling towards an inevitable death as it is. So you don't need to grasp so tightly on everything going on. And that's a note to myself, Joel, you don't have to grasp so tightly. And if you do that, then maybe you'll finally let yourself be happier. Thanks for watching.
Joel Clifton, yeah, please sub and comment and like. But on a serious note, the content is very good. It makes you think about yourself and your life differently.